What if the very heart of humanity's story was left out of its own script? For centuries, when scientists traced the origins of people through DNA, they drew glowing maps across the world, lines stretching from Africa to Europe, from Asia to the Americas. But in those bright maps, one region stood strangely dim: India. A land older than Mesopotamia, richer in languages than Europe, layered with civilizations that rose and fell, but in the archives of human ancestry, it was barely a whisper. Not absent, just ignored. This silence puzzled some. India is home to more than 1.4 billion people today, and even in ancient times, it was one of the densest hubs of humanity. The Ganges Plains, the Dravidian South, the Himalayan corridors, these weren't empty landscapes, they were crossroads, the kind of places where genes, languages, and cultures collide. So why didn't global genome projects place India at the center? The answer is unsettling. For decades, most ancient DNA research was funded in Europe, North America, or East Asia. India was treated like a blank spot, a periphery to the real story of human migration. The South, in particular, was reduced to a footnote. Tamil Nadu, Kerala, the lush edges of the Deccan. For thousands of years, their people composed epics, traded spices, mapped the stars. And yet, when scientists pieced together humanity's genetic archive, these voices went unheard. Until now. Because in recent years, a quiet revolution began, not in a museum, not in a government project, but in the labs, where scientists unlocked the vault of thousands of Indian genomes. Not just modern samples, full of recent mixing, but deep ancestral signals hidden in bones, teeth, and fragments unearthed from forgotten sites. And what they discovered broke every assumption about who Indians are and where they came from. The genes of India didn't just tell a regional story, they told the story. Inside those sequences were fingerprints from mountain passes, desert caravans, oceanic trade routes, lineages older than the pyramids, signals from people who had long vanished from the earth. A biological map of conversations between continents, stitched directly into the bodies of tribal elders, coastal fishermen, and villagers who never left their ancestral soil. But here's the twist. The silence wasn't an accident. It wasn't that the DNA didn't exist, it was that history itself had erased it. For centuries, the narrative of India's past was shaped by politics, textbooks, and ideologies that elevated some voices while silencing others. Northern invaders were glorified, indigenous voices minimized. Science, too, followed those biases. Grants flowed to study Europe's origins or the Aryan migration theory, while South India's deep ancestry remained untouched. But bones don't lie. When scientists finally sequenced the DNA of India's most ancient populations, they uncovered something shocking. The genes carried signals not just from Africa, not just from Asia, but from beings who weren't even human. Neanderthals, Denisovans, archaic cousins long extinct, their DNA had all but vanished in most of the world, and yet in India, especially in the South, it was everywhere, not faint traces, but archives, long, intact stretches of code, living fossils preserved in blood. This wasn't just about ancestry, it was about survival. It meant that when the first modern humans walked into India tens of thousands of years ago, they didn't arrive to emptiness, they arrived to shadows. They met others, beings like them, but not them. And they didn't just coexist, they merged. They carried pieces of each other forward. The result? Modern Indians today carries some of the richest diversity of ancient DNA found anywhere on Earth. And that changes everything. Because if Africa was humanity's cradle, then India may have been its great collision zone, a place where the old and the new, the human and the almost human met and fused. A place where stories didn't just happen, they survived in code, waiting for us to finally listen. But this is just the beginning. The DNA trail soon led scientists deeper into mysteries of migration, forgotten civilizations, and identities powerful enough to shake politics even today. Because in the soil of India lies a question no textbook dares to ask.
When scientists cracked open the genomes of South Indians, they expected to see echoes of Africa, maybe faint traces of early Asian migrations. What they did not expect was a storm of ghosts, because hidden inside those sequences were codes that should not have been there, at least not in such abundance. Neanderthal DNA. In Europe, the fragments were faint, broken shards scattered across modern genomes, rarely more than 1 or 2%. In East Asia, slightly stronger, but still limited. Yet in India, the story was different. In tribal groups across Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Karnataka, scientists discovered huge stretches of Neanderthal DNA, longer, richer, more intact than anything seen outside Africa. Some individuals carried over 90% of all Neanderthal sequences ever documented outside Europe. It was as if these people weren't just carrying fragments, they were carrying an archive. But that wasn't the end. Deeper still, they found another ghost, the Denisovans. For decades, Denisovans were a mystery. They were known only from a fragment of a pinky bone found in a Siberian cave and a few teeth. Their DNA was so rare that most populations in the world carry almost none of it. A few in Oceania, Papua New Guinea, Aboriginal Australia, show stronger signals, but even those are faint. India, however, broke the map. When researchers studied certain South Indian and tribal populations, the Irula, the Kurumba, the Palar, they found something shocking. Over half of all known Denisovan sequences were present in Indian genomes, and more than 50% of that DNA was unique, unmatched, found nowhere else on Earth. It meant one thing. India wasn't just a stopover for humans on their way east. It was a meeting ground, a collision zone. Picture it. Tens of thousands of years ago, the first modern humans walked out of Africa. They crossed the Arabian Peninsula, hugged the coasts, and entered the subcontinent. But they didn't find empty forests and caves. They found others. Neanderthals moving south, Denisovans drifting west from Asia's mountains, shadows around fires, voices in the ravines. And they met, not in war, not always, but in ways that left traces deeper than any stone tool or painted wall. They mingled, they merged, they passed on children who carried both lineages at once, and somehow those lineages survived longest in India. Why? Because India was never a monolith. It was a tapestry. Forests, deserts, coasts, highlands, refuge zones where small bands of people could survive, cut off from the mass extinctions that wiped out archaic groups elsewhere. In Europe, Neanderthals vanished under the shadow of ice ages. In Siberia, Denisovans disappeared into frozen caves. But in India's hills and forests, echoes of them lived on, in genes, in blood, in silence. For generations, textbooks painted India's earliest people, the so-called ancestral South Indians, AASI, as isolated hunter-gatherers, untouched and primitive. Yet the DNA told a different story. Far from isolated, they were part of a web of contact stretching across continents, carrying within them genetic memories of beings who no longer walked the earth. And this raises an unsettling thought. What if the first Indians didn't just inherit ancient genes? They inherited ancient encounters. Because in those dense forests and firelit caves, humans weren't alone. They saw faces that looked almost human, but not quite. Stronger jaws, broader brows, different voices. And instead of disappearing, those encounters became part of the Indian genome, preserved across tens of thousands of years until today. This makes India unique. In Europe, Neanderthal DNA is mostly broken, tiny snippets like static in a radio signal. In Oceania, Denisovan DNA is real, but fragmented. But in India, some of the longest intact segments ever found exist today, living archives of archaic cousins. Scientists are now using Indian DNA not just to trace ancestry, but to reconstruct entire Neanderthal and Denisovan genomes, not from fossils, from living blood. Think about that. Somewhere in the tribal belts of Tamil Nadu, in the coastal villages of Kerala, in the forest clearings of central India, men and women walk today carrying genetic libraries of beings long extinct. They don't even know it, but their bodies hold the most complete record of ancient cousins the world has ever seen. And that shifts everything. Because if Africa was the cradle of humanity, India was its crossroads, the place where the human story stopped being about survival alone and became about fusion. Fusion of bloodlines, fusion of species, fusion of pasts that textbooks never wrote down. But this was only the first shock, because buried alongside these ghostly ancestors was another signal, one that pointed not to hunters or gatherers, but to strangers from a distant mountain range. Strangers who arrived without crops, without kingdoms, but with blood that still flows strong in South India. A people from the Zagros Mountains of Iran. And their story would shake everything we thought we knew about how civilization itself began in India.
For decades, historians told a simple story about India's past. Civilization began with the Indus Valley, they said. Brick cities, granaries, irrigation, and order. Before that, India was a wilderness of hunter-gatherers. No writing, no farming, no history. But DNA tells another story. When scientists sequenced the genomes of tribal and South Indian populations, they expected two main layers. The AASI, descendants of the earliest Indians, carrying the echoes of Africa, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. Later arrivals, Indo-European speakers, farming communities, and migrants from Central Asia. But there was something else, something older, stranger. A genetic signature that pointed west. It wasn't Indo-European. It wasn't Mesopotamian. It was older still, stretching back to the Zagros Mountains of Iran, long before farming, long before kingdoms, long before the Persians or Elamites or Sumerians had names. This was the ancestry of the pre-farming Iranians. Around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, the people of the Zagros were among the first to experiment with cultivating plants and domesticating animals. But even before that, they were hunter-gatherers, mountain people, survivors of the Ice Age with their own distinct DNA. And here's the shock. That DNA shows up in India thousands of years before farming did. How? Somewhere between 12,000 and 8,000 years ago, small groups of Zagros-related people crossed into the subcontinent, maybe through Baluchistan, maybe along the Makran coast. They didn't come as conquerors, and they didn't arrive with plows. They came in small numbers, absorbed quietly into the forest tribes of South Asia. And yet their impact was enormous. Today, that Iranian hunter-gatherer ancestry is woven into almost every South Indian genome. In some groups, it's faint. In others, especially in the Dravidian-speaking populations, it forms nearly half the ancestry. Which means that long before the Indus Valley civilization, long before Aryan migrations, there was already a deep and silent fusion between the first Indians and these Zagros-related strangers. Here's what makes this truly mind-bending. When scientists first detected this ancestry, they assumed it must have arrived with farming. After all, the Fertile Crescent and the Zagros were among the world's first agricultural hubs. Surely farming spread eastward along with people, reaching India around 9,000 years ago. But then came the surprise. South India shows Iranian-related DNA without farming. The people who carried it were not farmers. They were hunter-gatherers themselves, which means this wasn't the spread of agriculture. It was the spread of blood. Think about the timeline. The first Indians, AASI, were already here for tens of thousands of years. Then came archaic ghosts. Neanderthal and Denisovan lineages fused into the genome. Then, before farming, small bands from Iran arrived and mixed into the population. By the time farming finally spread across South Asia, the groundwork was already laid. Indian populations were already a hybrid, AASI plus Iranian hunter-gatherers carrying echoes of the mountains in their veins. And here's the part that turns history upside down. The Indus Valley civilization, with its massive cities and planned streets, was long assumed to be a product of local innovation. Tribes settling down, experimenting with crops, building up step by step. But genetics now suggests something else. The very people who built Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were already a fusion, AASI plus Iranian ancestry. In other words, Indian civilization didn't begin with isolation. It began with mixing, with contact, with the quiet arrival of mountain people who became one with the land. This also explains why South India today carries such a strong genetic link to Iran. Not to modern Persians, not to the later empires, but to a much older layer. A layer so ancient that it predates wheat fields and barley terraces. And there's a poetic symmetry here. The AASI represented India's first roots, ancient, untouched, echoing with the ghosts of Africa and the archaic cousins. The Zagros migrants brought a second root, an infusion from the mountains of Iran, deep and silent, older than civilization itself. Together, they created the base population from which nearly every South Indian today descends. But this was not the end, because just as the subcontinent was settling into this fusion, another shockwave came. From the north, from the steppes, from horse-riding strangers who brought not just new blood, but new gods, new languages, and new power. The Indo-European migrations, and with them, the final reshaping of India's DNA mosaic.
For thousands of years, India's past has been a story written in myths, epics, and battles over interpretation. The Aryans, the invaders, the natives. The timeline always seemed clear, at least on paper. But now science is rewriting it, strand by strand, in the code of living blood. Around 5,000 years ago, a new player entered the stage. The steppe pastoralists, also known as the Yamnaya, roamed the grasslands of southern Russia and Kazakhstan. They rode horses, herded cattle, and spoke Proto-Indo-European languages, the ancestors of nearly every Indo-European tongue spoken today, including Sanskrit. Their arrival in India wasn't a cinematic invasion. No walls crumbled, no cities burned. Instead, it was a gradual migration, small bands moving into the northwest, merging with local populations and introducing new rituals, technologies, and genes. Their blood did not replace the existing inhabitants. It layered upon it, fusing with the AASI of South India, the Iranian hunter-gatherers, and the echoes of archaic humans already encoded in the population. The genetic signature is unmistakable. In northern India, groups historically tied to priesthood, warriors, and ruling classes carry up to 30% steppe ancestry, and the paternal lineage R1A Z93, directly tied to steppe nomads, lights up like a beacon. Yet, as you move south, the step signal fades, giving way to the ancient fusion of AASI plus Iranian ancestry. This gradient, north to south, is not just a story of migration, it is a map of cultural and linguistic history written in blood. This DNA reveals the truth. India was never a land of isolated purity. It has always been a living mosaic, shaped by waves of migration, encounters, and exchanges. The Aryans were not conquerors. They were part of a long continuum of arrivals and integrations that began tens of thousands of years earlier with the first humans who stepped off the African continent. Yet even in this intricate blending, something survives. The first Indians, the AASI, the original hunter-gatherers of the subcontinent, left traces that endure to this day. In the forests of the south, in the Nilgiris, in remote tribal belts, and in the Andaman Islands, these people carry the purest echoes of India's deep past, DNA that has survived millennia of mixing. They are the living memory of a time before agriculture, before cities, before gods were named and kingdoms were built. And in the layers above them, we see humanity's story unfold. Neanderthals and Denisovans, long extinct, whisper through our genes. Zagros mountain hunter-gatherers, silent travelers from Iran, merged with locals long before farming took hold. Steppe pastoralists, horse riders from the north, introduced languages, rituals, and a new genetic wave. Maritime traders, Persian and Roman arrivals carried genes across oceans into South India, shaping coastal populations for millennia. Every individual in India today carries this story, encoded in millions of base pairs, a biological library of human encounters, migrations, and survival. It is a truth far richer than any single text, tradition, or theory. It defies the simple categories of native or invader. It shows that India has always been both local and global, isolated and connected, ancient and evolving. And this is where we reach the ultimate realization. Purity is a myth, but connection is eternal. Every priest, warrior, farmer, weaver, and fisher carries the legacy of multiple continents and countless generations. Every gene is a story. Every strand is proof that humans have always been travelers, negotiators, and collaborators, sometimes consciously, sometimes through the quiet inevitability of life. So when you look at the map of India, or the castes, the tribes, the languages, the rituals, remember, the divisions we see today are recent. They are political, social, and cultural layers superimposed upon a foundation of shared ancestry older than any kingdom or scripture. Your DNA carries the story of strangers from the mountains of Iran, nomads from the steppe, archaic humans from the shadows of the past, and first Indians who walked these lands tens of thousands of years before any history was written. And in that story, there is a question. Who do we belong to? Not a caste, not a kingdom, not a nation, but to the continuity of life itself, to the migration of ideas, genes, and encounters that make us human. Because in the end, India is not a story of separate peoples. It is a story of fusion, resilience, and survival. And every Indian, north or south, carries within them the echoes of all who came before, the ghosts of those who vanished, and the seeds of all that is yet to come. So the next time you trace your family tree, remember this: you are not just the product of your immediate ancestors. You are the culmination of tens of thousands of years of human history preserved silently in your DNA. You are both ancient and modern, local and global, singular and collective. And in that dual existence lies the real wonder of being Indian and being human. The past is not gone, it is alive, flowing in your veins, whispering stories older than memory itself. and the journey of discovery has only just begun.